Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's a particular pleasure for me to welcome you to this session where we're going to talk about policy coherence, which is one of the key components of this course. And in the session today, I have the big pleasure of introducing you or reintroducing some of you to our former colleague, Miriam Budra, who used to be the coordinator of the labor migration cluster here at the ITC ILO and is now working as project manager for the ILO in the field and specifically in North Africa. So she has both of the, let's say, both hats on in a way. She is an experienced trainer within the ITC, specifically on labor migration, but she's also bringing her field experience into the discussion today. So I'm sure it's going to be a particularly enriching session. As you know, the sessions are being recorded and the recordings posted on the eCampus right after the end. We're also going to share the PowerPoint presentation and any additional material that may be relevant to the specific topics that we're going to address today. And as usual, and especially because we're kind of an intimate gathering this morning, we would like to encourage you to keep the sessions as interactive and as engaging as possible. So feel free to share your questions, your comments, your reflections, any experiences that you may have to contribute to the discussion, either by using the chat box, and we can pick from there, or by using the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen and then taking the floor directly. So with that being said, I'll just pass the floor directly to our colleague Miriam. Miriam, it's a great pleasure to have you back in this course, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Miki, for the introduction. It's a little bit odd, I have to say. Feel like I never, I never left, but it's always a pleasure to be with, I would say, my former team, but that I still consider as obviously my colleagues and part of my team. So, good morning, afternoon. I don't know. Maybe I think even I see some name that I'm think are located in the Pacific, so I would even say it's almost good evening or mostly good night on your side. So as Miki mentioned, my name is Miriam Boudra. I'm a project manager of the project called TAM Plus, which is looking at a holistic approach to labor migration and mobility in North Africa, covering Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, specifically towards the corridor with the EU country. So the whole objective of the project is very much to reinforce the governance of labor migration, particularly within the talent partnership. So the talent partnership is an EU initiative trying to reinforce skills mobility between EU member states, part of the talent partnership, and non-European states, such as, for instance, certain North African countries, which are also part of the talent partnership. So the whole point is indeed very much to looking at what would make labor mobility easily, but also, and this is very much related to the session of today, how ensuring coherence between employment and skills policy and labor migration policy. So when we discuss about coherence, very often we need to understand that labor migration as such, whether you have a specific migration policy or a specific strategy, is very much interlinked with any other sectoral policy. Obviously, from the perspective of the ILO, we're very much looking into policies such as skills, vocational training, education, and obviously employment. But you can consider impact on other policies, such as agriculture policies, such as health policies, such as policy related to families and to gender policies. So it's very much looking at sectoral policy, social policy, and looking if migration impact on this policy or if this policy impact as well on migration. So today we will see, I would say, three components. One is understanding the coherence between, in our specific case, employment and labor migration policies. Then how do we assess this coherence? And finally, potentially looking in a specific sector, which is the health sector, which lately is being very much in demand, in particularly in country of destination for better or more organized migration. So I have a presentation. I will share my screen and okay. Just if you can confirm that you see my screen, I will maybe put here the first one. It, and now it should be on full screen.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So you will see in my presentation that I do also have some slide for opening discussion. So I understand as well from colleagues that you are a very active group. So I very much expect you or count on your participation and also very much sharing the experience from your respective country. So as we say, when we talk about policy coherence, what are we talking about? So what we want is is ensuring that policy, strategy, program related to migration are not conflicting with other area. And whether it's directly or indirectly, unintentionally. And here we cannot only looking at, I say, to employment or labor policy, we have also to consider policies on education, vocational training, but as I mentioned also on certain social policies. It's a very complex policy coherence. Obviously, today we're looking it from the perspective of migration, but we can obviously looking it from perspective of any other kind of policy. It's not specific to migration, but most of the policy are interacting to each others. But how making sure that you are not creating confusion from the governance and from the perspective of a country. We're making sure that everything as such is coherent, everything is well coordinated. Um, how making sure that any policies are also contributing to each others. In the specific case of migration, what we very often see is that you might have employment strategy taking at the national level, and then when you're opening the strategy or the policy, there is very little related to migration. And most likely in countries where we know that migration can be a push or pull factors. So how ensuring that if you do not have a specific labor migration policy, at least migration is mainstreamed into the specific employment strategy or policy. Is it about creating a specific track within your strategy? Is it about in every specific provision of your policy, including or seeing where migration is relevant? So these are the kind of questions you have to ask yourself when you developing a strategy which is not necessarily specific to labor migration. But let's assume that you have also developing, you also have a specific labor migration strategy policy program. Is this policy program in line with the existing policy? Is the employment policy talking to the specific labor migration policy? Now, let me give you an example very clear. I'm presently, as I mentioned, working in North Africa. And right now, there is the development of a national strategy for mobility and migration in Morocco. And this strategy has been developed at the same moment that the employment strategy has been developed. So both of them are very much interlinked. And actually, the migration strategy is directly referred within the employment strategy itself. So these are the kind of approach you need to consider to make sure that you don't have as mentioned in the slide, conflict or direct conflict, or even if it's not intentional, that when you're looking into the two documents, they are not talking to each other or they are not rightly coherent. So that process is quite particular and it's quite complicated because what does it require? It's required that ministries, public institutions, private sectors, trade unions are talking to each other, and there is collaboration among different institutions, public institutions first, but also involvement of non-state actors. So why is it important if you to ensure this policy coherence? From the perspective, I would say, of employment and migration, it's first ensuring sustainable labor market strategy. Because let's take the example of a country which is a highly country of origin, and knowing that potentially there are opportunities abroad. But at the same time, this specific country also know its own development. So if you are if your strategy with regard of migration is only to send as much as possible workers abroad, the risk you might face internally is that you didn't anticipate right your own specific needs, and at one point you might also face labor shortage. So you need to have a sustainability in your labor market strategy. How can I, at the same time, ensure that I respond to the specific need of my own labor market and therefore also my own development, but at the same time potentially respond as well and to labor market needs in other countries abroad that also provide other opportunities for my own workers of, for instance, regular migration. It's a way also to prevent brain drain and skill mismatch. Brain drain from the perspective, obviously, of the country of origin. You have, as I mentioned, potentially specific needs. How making sure that all your needs and all your skills are not leaving the country, but skills mismatch, particularly from the perspective of the country of destination, because you might have skills that are not necessarily recognized, and you might face problems of, and that we see very often, of skills joining your country but not able to be integrated into the labor market at the same level of the skills they have. So this is a very loss-loss situation for both the country of destination, the country of origin, but the migrant workers himself or herself. And that's obviously coherence can ensure this kind of mutual benefit for country of origin and destination. And when we talk about policy coherence, it's obviously, as I mentioned, cooperation at the institutional level, at the national level, but it's also cooperation at the international level, because you need in a way to have a system which benefit to both country of origin and destination. So in a way, filling the gaps for potentially the labor shortage in the country of destination, but also ensuring the development of the country of origin. And obviously at the center is also the questions related to the specific rights and inspiration of the migrant workers. And then, as this is my last point, is indeed the questions related to the protection of migrant workers. Policy coherence should very much at the center has the interest of the migrant workers themselves, and ensuring their protection and access to their rights as migrant workers, but also as human beings. There is an example, for instance, in Philippines. So Philippines has very important country of origin for many countries in many regions. We see Filipinos very much present in the Gulf country, in Middle East, but also very much present in Europe. And more we have seen as well Filipinos workers, for instance, joining as well the labor market in North Africa. They are very much focused on specific sectors, and one of the most famous sector, I would say, where we see Filipinos and particularly women migrant workers engage is in the care economy and in the health sector. So there are some nurses training programs that produce many graduates, but because the domestic opportunities are quite limited, it's very much leading to immigration. And what in Philippines they are very much focusing with regard of policy coherence is to support, I wouldn't even say a fair migration, but an ethical migration. What is ethical meaning there is in a way not depriving the needs for the own development of the country of origin, therefore in that specific case Philippines. So in this ethical migration agreement, there is very much the emphasis as well on the reintegration program. So ensuring that these health workers come back in Philippines, and not only reintegration programs with the role to be played by Filipinos government once the workers are coming back, but it's also within the programs ensuring an ongoing skills training for health workers, meaning that while living Philippines and going abroad in these specific programs, they are keeping, to have access to training and to reinforce their own capacities, their own skills for as well serving once coming back the interest, I would say, of the Filipino labor market needs. So this is the kind of consideration to look into when we consider a connection between employment policy or or labor market needs and labor migration policy.
Miriam, perhaps
Yes.
now is a good time just to maybe to pause a bit and take some
Yes.
questions, because we have is generating your presentation thus far is generating already 4 questions or comments, one of which from Julia. We're gonna upon her own suggestion, we can take it at the end of the session, but she also has another question. We can start with Muriel. Muriel, who has a question, but I can go ahead as usual and read the question, or if you want to take the floor, please do so, Muriel.
Thank you. I'll just take the floor. So, good evening, Myriam. Bonsoir. J'espère que vous allez bien.
Bonsoir,
This is
Muriel.
Myriam
Comment
from
allez-vous?
Vanuatu. Je vais bien, merci. I just want to. I'm interested in hearing all these priority aspects that we could address in our policy coherence to address the concern specifically on the brain drain of our skilled workforce. And one of my questions is, in some of the domestic labor markets, we can experience the challenges relating to the non-incentive and benefits that will return, skilled workforce back into the domestic labor market. Now, when this is presented as a conflict and a challenge, how can we ensure it is better addressed in that policy coherence to balance the needs of the domestic labor market versus the needs of the supply, management to labor mobility programs? Thank you.
Thank you, Muriel. Isham, how you want to? Shall I answer directly, or there are other questions? Let me know how you want me to proceed.
Other 2 questions, maybe we can take a look at the questions. There's a question from Aida asking, what are some key indicators or benchmarks for measuring policy coherence in labor migration? And are there any examples in the Africa region? Then Julia's question is a bit, Julia, would you like to take the floor on that one, or would you prefer that I go ahead and read the comment?
Yes, I can try. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. No, the question was pertaining to the point on brain drain, and I was just curious. I know that we're a smaller group, but also I'd be curious to hear Miriam's and others' take on it, because I feel like sometimes the matter of brain drain, we use that phrase or that concept rather undisputed and saying, okay, there's always the risk of that having detrimental effects on countries of origin. And at least there's some publications also that's come out that the discussion is changing a bit. For example, Hinde Haas has also published about it and saying actually the benefits of skilled labor migration by, or at least not, but maybe not outweigh, but are even to the immigration of skilled laborers, for example, because labor markets can't even absorb the number of skilled workers, and that actually the developmental effects are far greater. So he is also a researcher from the Global North, and also my ministry that we're working with on that matter has more of a stand. We need skilled workers as a country of destination. But yeah, maybe you also have some take on the stand of the discussion. Also, maybe colleagues from other contexts have some thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I see there is another questions, Isham, on the key indicators.
That's the one I read before from Ida, so yes.
Yeah, so if I may, Ida, on the specific one, I actually have I have some slide at the end on how assessing policy coherence. So I would cover that clearly later on. And in any case, they are, and I will make sure as well that they are available for you, some specific ILO publication related to how measure policy coherence that are actually taking as example African countries, mainly Western African countries. But just to say, I think, yes, there are examples in Africa, and there are, obviously, I won't be able to cover it all in the presentation, but you can read later on further on that in the specific publication. I will start with Muriel questions. I think, Muriel, this is a questions that coming very often from many countries of. I wouldn't say, it's not that easy to say you are a country of origin or a country of destination. It's much more complicated than that. But let's say that countries where there is quite important migration towards towards foreign countries. I think it's very complicated, obviously, to retain some specific skills, because at the end of the day, yes, there are some specific agreements, there are some potentially specific I am facilitating migration or not. But at the end of the day, it's remaining a kind of push-pull factors. And most of the migration is still happening on a very individual process. And if some workers are some specific keys that are needed abroad, and this is the willingness of the workers to move because there is no opportunities in its own country or her own country, yes, obviously, there is very little you can do to retain that specific workers, that specific skills. So this is a challenge faced by many countries. Also because, let's be frank, what are the potential access to decent work, or there is potentially a decent work deficit in the country of origin, comparing that potentially some of the opportunities abroad with regard of wages, with regard of access to social protection, and with other many aspects that are not necessarily linked directly to labor rights. Having said that, I think the responsibility from the perspective of a government, and in what the government can act, is ensuring that you anticipate what are the specific skills you need. Meaning, for instance, with your vocational training program, with your training program, education programs, you need in a way to ensure that, well, if we know that there are some specific, how ensuring that we have our future workers, going towards some specific sector that are also needed for our own economy. And if I'm training, I shouldn't train only for the internet, I would say, to the foreigners labor market, but also to my own needs. And there is what we see in many countries today. They are actually kind of negotiating with country of destination. Let me give you an example, and it's not necessarily high-skilled workers. They are actually, and if we're looking, if I take the example where I'm working now, the European labor market, but it would be a little bit the same case, Muriel, for you, looking at the needs of Australia and New Zealand. Many of the needs are in, I would say, low or mid-skill level. And this is where, for instance, many North African countries are saying, okay, fair enough. You do need this specific occupation. Well, I also potentially need them. So how making sure that you are also, as country of destination, contributing to my own vocational training system, because I shouldn't bear the cost of training your future workers. And so that's one aspect that is very much emphasized by countries. The second one is also for avoiding skills mismatch of problems of skills recognition. Certain countries right now are basically looking at the skills classification system of European country and duplicating and ensuring that they have the same kind of classification system. Therefore, when they are training their workers, they already have the same they already have, I would say, recognition of the skills and the certification in line with the EU labor market. So that's a way also to avoid, I would say, skills mismatch, or ensuring that there is no brain waste for abroad. But as I said, there is very little that can be done, to maintain some specific skills. And the worst, I would say, is if you're putting bans, for avoiding certain kind of skills to move abroad, it might, in fact, even enhance irregular migration. So the best is also, and coming back to the collaboration between country of origin and destination, ensuring potentially that you have incentives for returning, having reintegration programs that will bring back certain of the skills that are potentially abroad and that are needed as well for your own development. So there is more and more discussion also on how circular migration could also ensure circularity of skills, meaning that the workers might leave at one point but will return in as much as possible with new skills. So it's also the engagement from the country of destination to continue to contribute to the skills development of the workers once they are abroad. With regard of your question, Julia, that's Julia, right? If I'm not mistaken. There is I'm quite familiar as well with the Hein publication, and I kind of agree as well. I think there is potentially very little. There is potentially not the possibility for all countries to absorb certain skills or high-skilled workers that have been trained. But and therefore, it's not necessarily brain drain in the sense that even the labor market at the national level cannot necessarily absorb them. But I would say here, we need to be also very careful, and this is where skills anticipation is very important, about also the own development of certain countries. And you do have countries which potentially today cannot absorb that workers, but tomorrow might need them. And it's obviously very much depending the level of development of country of origin. But very often when you do have country with a quite of certain level of education, these countries are in a development which is, I would say, potentially in good tracks, and therefore in the future might need these workers as well. So everything, and this is also a little bit what the ILO is pushing for, is skills anticipation. You have to understand what are your future needs, because while responding or while also ensuring, facilitating skills mobility, make sure that you also have skills that are needed for your own development. And with globalization, when you're discussing with the employers federation in country of origin, they say, well, if all our skills are abroad, how competitive we are with foreigner company, coming as well in our own countries. So it's also looking and listening very carefully to the needs of the private sector, and particularly to the employers and chamber of commerce, because they are also in need of certain skills. So I'm coming back here to the questions of skill circulation and facilitating as much as possible, when obviously this is the interest of the workers and the unwillingness of the workers, that if they want to return, there is also here accompanying programs to facilitate their professional reintegration, which still today is very shy, I would say, in many countries. I think, Hisham, I covered it all.
You did indeed. We have some comments, but they pertain more to the question of brain drain from and Jacqueline is commenting on on Julia's question. She said, I was wondering about that too, because of the article and the reference about the number of nurses increasing domestically in the Philippines as well. I don't know how common this is though, and other studies where the potential of migration also incentivizes people to invest in their education.
So if there are studies with regard of if they are study on investing on their own education, right? Did I understand clearly, Sham?
Jacqueline, would you like to take the floor to expand a bit more on this?
Sure. So I had been thinking the same thing as Julia, just having recently also read that book where they were referring to the case in the Philippines, where because migration offers this potential return and the programs were also being developed, that, you know, people were also participating in those programs, but not everybody actually migrates in the end. And so that in terms of the numbers, also the nurses were increasing domestically. Although I don't have the study in front of me right now to see it. But then recently also in the context of a publication we're working on, it's actually related to youth in agri-food systems, but we were looking at the migration angle. And this brain drain question was coming up. And so we were also looking at other studies related to the potential the potential of migration in terms of an increased return to education. So in some contexts where, you know, migrants with skills were having, say, better outcomes and returns, it was offering this opportunity that people were also investing in their own schooling more, or families were investing in schooling, and education levels were increasing because there was that opportunity to migrate and get a better return out of it later. And then again, not everybody necessarily going. Although we also found studies where if it was expected that the migrant was going to be employed in low-skilled labor, that they didn't have that same incentive, say, to invest in their education. But anyways, I was just thinking on those topics also when as Julie was speaking as well. Because I don't know, I haven't comprehensively seen, I guess, if these are like outlier cases or if this is a common phenomenon, or, you know.
Thank you, Jacqueline. We do have, I think we can have one more comment from Ida regarding the brain drain question, and we can go back to the presentation, Miriam, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, because I still had my first slide.
Yeah. Well, it's generating a lot of discussion.
No,
That's
no,
what
I'm
we're here
fine.
for.
You know, in any case, at the end, the slides will be shared with participants. But
Yes.
just say I have 30 slides.
Well, maybe we can cut it down.
Maybe
Anyway.
we have to.
Ida, are you able to take the floor regarding the brain drain question before we move on to the presentation? Or would you like me to read the comment?
I think you can just read. Thank you.
Okay. So Ida's, my opinion on brain drain question may be answered in analyzing how returning migrants return with skills that are not utilized in countries of origin, hence becoming brain waste. Poor migration data systems to account for returning skill amplifies the voice of brain drain than gains. I agree that local markets may fail to absorb existing skills, hence it becomes migration drive.
Yeah, if I may, just one comment, more general comments, Ishaman, to the different intervention. What I think is very important is also to hear, for instance, from the vocational system, the vocational training system in the country of origin. So that's maybe it's not very much linked to the high skill. It's maybe more looking at low and mid skills. But let me here give a very practical aspect. In certain countries, you do have occupation sectors that are not very much attractive because maybe potentially people are learning the job informally, you know. Let's say, for instance, plumber. Okay, in certain countries, you're just listening by doing the job, and then, okay, you know, you are not necessarily attracted to go in that specific training programs. But at the same times, you might have needs of plumbers abroad. And therefore, the same sectors might be, I mean, the same training, the same training program become potentially attractive because it will be in a way your passport to go abroad. And from the perspective, and when you're discussing, you're talking with vocational training programs or centers, they see that, they say, okay, at the same time, if we might attract, and this is very, for instance, the case of need people, so people which are nor in the education or nor in the labor market engaged. So these people that are clearly, very complicated to absorb or to integrate in the national labor market, they might see, this program as a way as well for immigration. Okay, but at the same time, you are kind of formalizing at the national level a specific occupation or a specific sector, and making it also at the same time more professional for national needs, but also more attractive for potentially immigration. So the thing here with coherence, to come back to the questions of coherence, is that when you take some strategy that potentially are national strategy, whether it's your vocational training policy, your skills policy, it's to see how potentially, because migration is there in the context, it might also serve the national interest. At the end of the day, let's be clear, migration will always remain an individual decision. And it has to remain an individual decision that workers should be free, to emigrate. Obviously, there is behind questions related to visa, questions to programs. But the fact is that it shouldn't be, migration should be an individual decision of an individual, and the responsibility of a government is ensuring that if someone want to move, or if someone is or a group of person is willing to move, you're creating orderly and fair and secure corridors. So that's, I think, is very much also the responsibility both of country of origin and destination. But the coherence here, brain drain, yes, obviously will always exist, and it's more happening at certain sectoral level. It's very much depending countries. It's very much depending the level as well, if I put that, of development of specific countries. But it's not only about that. It's sometimes also about the political context of the country. It's about the social context of the country. So there are so many aspects that might push particularly skilled workers to move their own country. But there is how making sure that at least, or you creating incentives for bringing them back, and therefore it's also mean you have an active reintegration policy, because it won't happen from one day to another, and it won't happen naturally, if I might put it in that way. Or you have active programs, migration, I would say, programs that facilitate potentially the circularity of migration. And therefore, with the circularity of migration, as well the circularity of skills. But at the center, and I will repeat that, as the ILO, we need to put the rights and the protection of the migrant workers at the center of any programs. Can I continue, Isham?
Yes, we actually have more questions, but I think we can address them a bit later. Maybe they'll be addressed in the presentation. Please go ahead, Miriam.
Okay, I'll try to, let me see. Okay. So coherence, I would try to skip certain slide, or to go quite quickly on certain slides. So if we're looking at the coherence level, it's happening, and I think I mentioned that before, it's happening at different level. It's happening first, obviously, at the international level, looking into standards, looking into binding, non-binding principles, ensuring here as well that international standards are coherent among each other. So you need, when developing a specific standard related to policies or migration that is very much in line with existing standard, meaning that you shouldn't have, if I'm just looking into the ILO standard, it's not specific to ILO, but let's say that if you have a convention, a new convention recommendation, the questions of migration, if you're looking carefully, is always somewhere integrated. If you're looking, I will give you one of the last example. There is a specific convention on domestic work. Okay, so Convention 189, the Convention on Domestic Work is not specific to migration, right? But you will see that because we know that domestic workers are often migrant workers, that there are certain provisions that are referring to migration, that are mainstreaming migration into this specific instrument. And if you're looking at this specific instrument related to migration, and if you're looking to the migration specific instrument, you will actually see that they are very much in line. So this is the kind of coherence that you're creating at the international level. Another example is if you're looking lately more at the Global Compact on Migration, there is very much reference to existing instruments, and they are very much recalling or referring to binding instrument of the ILO, but also the UN Convention 1990. So this is also ensuring that international standards are coherent among each others. Then if you're looking at the regional mobility framework that you have in many regions, ASEAN, for instance, you have also the African Union, who has a specific agenda on migration, ECOWAS, IGAD, SADC as well has some specific framework on mobility at the regional level. You will see as well here that first they are in line with international standard, and they potentially go beyond, but they are at least respecting the minimum standard set by at the international level. And then they are very much often connected to other regional framework on skills, for instance, on mobility, on social protection. So you will see here as well that they are very much connected with other regional framework. National labor migration policy here as well so you have, I would say, kind of a vertical and horizontal coherence. Vertical, making sure that then the national labor migration policy, they have to respect regional mobility framework if in the specific case of a country part of a regional economic community, that itself is in line with international standard, and that the national labor migration policy, this is what I mentioned lately, you have connection with different national sectoral policies. And in the implementation is always happening at the local level. And local level might potentially have also some specific, depending the level of decentralization of the country, will have also its own specific regulation. And here as well, what we see very often, local regulation would very much looking in the implementation of policy adopted at the national level. Depending, I would say, at the level of autonomies of the regions, you might have some diversity among the regions, but they will always somewhere need to be in line with strategy policy adopted at the national level. What is very interesting with coherence and the local level here is, at the end of the day, impact of migration, whether you're a country of origin or destination, is witnessed at the local level. Impact of migration in rural area is not the same than in an urban area in the country of destination. Impact of migration from the perspective of country of origin is not the same at the rural area than in the urban area. So these differences can only be, I would say, addressed at the local level. Coherence is happening towards the whole design of a policy, and that's not necessarily the case only for migration, but how you do it. When you're developing your policy, you before the implementation, you make an assessment of coherence. And I hope I have time to go into that specific aspect, but otherwise you will have documentation on the platform looking at how you do this assessment. Then you start to implement your policy. And then at one point, again, you assess the coherence. So in the implementation, what is working, what is not working, is there coherence? Are we seeing incoherence between potentially the migration policy and the employment policy, what we've seen happening in practice. You have some policy potentially feedback. You need to gather some feedback, and then potentially you need to adapt your legislation or your framework, and then it might lead, to adjustment of your policy or change of policy. So this is the cycle. It's not, obviously, it's quite a long, medium long-term cycle, but this is coherence. Assessment would happen, I would say, at 2 levels: before the implementation and during the implementation for adjustment and adaptation if needed. Isham, you want me to make some break, or shall I continue?
No, you can please continue, Miriam.
Okay. So when we design the policy, what we need to take into consideration for ensuring coherence, it's quite, I mean, you might see that obvious, but it's worth to repeating it, because what we've seen very much in practice is that it's not for taking for granted that those principles are mentioned. So first we talk about principle of equality between migrant workers and national, and that should be central in the development of your policy. So if you, for instance, developing an employment or youth employment policy, ensuring that if you do not have necessarily a specific labor migration policy or specific strategy within your employment policy, ensuring that towards the different part of your strategy or policy, you reinforce the principle of equality between migrant workers and national. If it's not central, what you might creating with your active labor policy is that you will create in the implementation discrimination that at the end of the day might also lead against the interest of your own national, from the perspective, I would say, of a country of destination. Refer as much as possible to international standard. And then here, if we're looking at the specific ILO convention related to migration, Convention 97 and 143, that are also accompanied by recommendation 86 and 151, you will see that they are very practical and very specific guidelines on developing, obviously, a labor migration policy, but also aspects that could be in the interest of specific employment policy, and where you can as well providing certain provision that are in line with this specific instrument. There are also non-binding instruments that was adopted in 2006, so almost 20 years ago. That is, as I mentioned, non-binding, but providing guidance and good practices in the effort of developing more labor migration policy, but also that could inspire if you don't necessarily have a labor migration policy, and if you're looking to more vocational training policy or an employment policy, providing guidance to ensure that migration is well mainstream as well. So this instrument is quite interesting because it's the result of negotiation between employers, workers' organization, and government, both from side of country of origin and destination. So it's the consensus from the tripartite actors of the ILO, the constituent, but as well from the perspective of both country of origin and destination. It integrates as well here all questions related to links between migration and development, which were not necessarily as centered in Convention 97 and 143, because looking at the time they were adopted, this concern of connection or linkages between sustainable development and migration was not centered. We can refer to other instruments. There is also the Global Compact on migration. There are also instruments or recommendations taken at the regional level that are, again, if you're referring to my previous scheme, you will see that they are always connected to international agreed binding or non-binding standard. what we see as a challenge in policy implementation is that it's quite challenging to ensure the consistencies and effectiveness during the implementation process. So you might have it on paper, okay, particularly questions related to equality between migrant workers and nationals, but when it's about the implementation, it's another story. So here, how you measure that, how you're creating, particularly, this assessment moment that you ensure that at the end, you are respecting, you have proof of measuring to what extent there is equality of treatment, if I'm just giving this example, between migrant workers and national. On top of potentially national legislation, you do have potential multilateral or bilateral agreement and regional economic communities framework that would also impact on national policy. And here, the question is, a national policy normally should always be in line with this bilateral, multilateral agreement. So potentially, if you have a national policies that is in place since a while, you might need to adopt it to make sure that it's responding as well to guidance given at the regional international level. Sometimes we also see that while developing a specific bilateral labor agreement, this instrument is not necessarily in line with national legislation. So in bilateral agreement, you always need to have specific reference to national legislation, international convention ratified by both parts, regional framework or international framework as well. And that is sometimes also a very kind of safeguard for the parties that are negotiating, because you shouldn't negotiate something which is against your national legislation, which is against international convention that's were ratified by the country. In a nutshell, if we're looking at the key principles of policy coherence, you need to have this whole of government approach, because as I mentioned, it's collaboration between different ministries, labor, clearly, foreign affairs, interiors, health, education. So, and it's also a multi-stakeholder participation. It's not only government. You need also to listen and to hear the voice of non-state actors, such as employers, workers, organization, training institution. I mentioned that very importantly and very vocally, and obviously migrant workers, migrant groups as well. One of the challenge is obviously while developing your policy is the questions of using labor market data to shape your policy. On migration, what we see is the questions, the challenge to have access to migration data or labor market data that as well include migration component. And here Coherence also has a role to play. Let me give you an example. If you have a national survey, to what extent your survey is also including questions related to migration? To what extent, when you have labor market survey, there is a specific module, a component with regard of migration. So these are adjustments that need to be done because it will serve both the interest of your social policies, labor policy, and as well your migration policy. And then you need to monitor and evaluate. So how you track the outcome of your policy and how you adjust your policy accordingly. So this is also very much important to have this assessment. As I said, there is a specific guide that has been developed with by the ILO on assessing coherence of migration. So it can help you to develop this monitoring and evaluation of your policy. So I will pause for a moment and ask indeed questions to the audience with regard of your own experience on what do you think are some of the potential benefits and challenges in adopting a more comprehensive or coordinating approach to labor migration policy. what do you see? Do you think in your respective context that is there, according to you, policy coherence in your respective country?
Indeed, thank you, Miriam. Now the floor is open for any participants. You can feel free to take the floor or write in the chat box as always. We'll give you 5 to 10 seconds generously to digest the question and then provide the answer. No, but take your time to digest the question and then feel free to take the floor to provide an answer. We have Julia is requesting to take the floor. Julia, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Hisham. I can try a bit and speak a bit from what's currently one ongoing discussion in Germany. So I think Germany being mostly a destination country, one of the things that I think Germany has realized by now that we're really running out of workforce. Our society is aging. So what they're looking at is finding ways of attracting skilled workers from outside the EU, because also other EU countries have a similar demographic development. So what they're aiming to do, and that's something that they have passed, I think 2 years ago, was a new policy which kind of eases some of the barriers and restrictions for people to come into Germany. So you will have to have, or they lowered the standards you need to have in terms of German language, also when it comes to your professional education. So that's the aim of the policy that they put in place, make it easier for people to come. At the same time, the whole debate about irregular migration and returning people is huge. So I think that's one of the big challenges or shortcomings that we are facing. We have a lot of people in country already that are not allowed to work, that are not being given the chance. So we have a huge mismatch when it comes to, we need workers on all skills levels, actually. It's not just high skilled people. And trying to attract those from outside. So I think a comprehensive, and the country has a sort of strategy to have all these kind of pillars for filling the gaps, but I think it's not sufficiently intertwined, and that's one of the reasons is that the different ministries want to have their share, and that's their domain, and they want to be seen for their efforts rather than really collaborating with other ministries. And then the second point, maybe because I work for GIZ, when we look at some of the programs that we do, they're trying to really closer link labor migration and employment, or TVET programs, and that's the main reason also why I took this course, because that's an ongoing conversation that they're trying to do. And I think in some cases makes a lot of sense when you look at also the level of education and for example, in Ghana, it makes a lot of sense where the programs really aligned to each other. In other contexts, in other country contexts, I think it makes not so much sense, because maybe the TVET level of education is very different, or the system itself is very different from the one in Germany. And I think that's another challenge, that right now we're trying to put a one-size-fits-all approach to all kinds of different country contexts, which I think is not applicable. Generally, the idea or the thinking of linking TVET programs and labor migration to Germany within regions or to Europe makes sense, but it has to be context specific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. We do have also a comment from Kalima in the chat box saying that one challenge is the different priorities among stakeholders involved in migration. For example, national security institutions versus the Ministry of Labor.
Thank you, Isham. Just very quickly with regard of both interventions. So let me start first with Julia. I think the case of Germany is quite interesting. Indeed, they have been very. If I'm comparing to other European countries, let's say at least looking at Europe, Germany was clearly among the more proactive in its approach to migration and to the to recognize the labor market needs of Germany, and very much also to the projections are what will happen and what will be our upcoming and future needs. And they have been very proactive programs for addressing labor shortage. But at the same time, and I think this is very much what you highlighted, is indeed the TVET system in Germany is quite particular comparing to other countries, and the certification is much more developed and than in other countries, and therefore also for country of origin much more complicated for getting the recognitions. So what I see, for instance, in my and you would know because GIZ is one of the partners of TAM Plus, is indeed the efforts made as well for the questions related to investing as well in the training system in the country of origin, meaning that at the end of the day, you facilitating the access to the German labor market while investing directly in the TVET system in the country of origin, making sure that in a way it's responding to your needs. It can be in any case also interesting for the country of origin because, well, first it doesn't harm, and secondly it's opening a kind of corridors or favorite corridors, I would say, towards at least one country. There is, I think, as you rightly mentioned as well, the problems of, and that is also in the, I think the comment mentioned by Kalima, the fact that you have different and it's not necessarily only the case for Germany, but you have different priorities. And if you're looking it from the perspective, if you're looking migration priorities from the perspective of labor market, is not the same that the perspective seen from a security angle. And there you have obviously challenging of collaboration and vision sometimes among the same government, seeing different priorities. Let's be frank, and that's the true for any country of destination and also country of origin. Migration is at the heart of today political debate and elections. So you have sometimes a issue, if I may put it issue, and migration as an issue. It's not an issue, but you have a topic that has been addressed on a very short-term approach because of elections, but required a long-term vision because what you're investing potentially today in the access to your labor market of migrant workers or potentially refugees as well. And here, for instance, Germany had made huge step comparing to other European countries with providing access to refugees to the vocational training and labor market is an investment for the future because you try to address, you anticipate the needs that will come that are today, some of them are already existing, but some would come in the future and in a very near futures. But that is very not seen most of the time or not accepted or not discussed in debate that there is where there is potentially questions of or interest of elections and that's the challenge that you might faced in most of the country. But my point here is that because you highlight that, Julia, in your comments, it's not specific to Germany. But we can see, and I think this is also something to recognize and to acknowledge for Germany, they have been very active to making the connection between migration and access to TVET and connection with TVET programs and migration.
Thank you, Miriam. We have one last comment from Jacqueline, who's focusing on the challenges. So potential challenges include a different timing of policies development and also how long the policy development approval process can take, and also changes of government.
That's indeed, thank you, Jacqueline. I mean, it's in a way linked, I am, if I may, to what I said. The policy development is quite long, and you have to accept that, And very often we see policy development connected to in many cases to international cooperation and to specific project that has a specific time frame. But the time frame of a project is not necessarily the time frame of a policy development or a government. So that is also something as well to consider, and how you ensure sustainability. And then there is change of government, and there is change, and sometimes not necessarily because of election, there is change of ministry, and then ministry has other priorities, or change the whole team, and you have to start the whole process here again. So that's the reality, I would say, to any policy development, not necessarily migration, not necessarily employment. But the thing is that employment policy, and it's the same, I would say, to migration policy, is very much policy that you have to have on a long-term vision. You have to get a long-term vision when these kind of policies, but they are at the center of short-term concern. Unemployment might lead to change of government, might lead in the elections to change of to new elections. Migration, and the way migration is today hosted and hosted even to public debate, is also, looking at immediate reactions. But that takes times, and unfortunately, we don't let sometimes the result of policies happening, and then you have new change again. But that's, I think, it's the case in all countries and in many policies. But the challenge, I would say, in specifically to employment migration policy, it's long-term vision policy, when you need to anticipate and you need to have a vision, really. And we don't necessarily let that policy having or showing the impact they can bring.
Thank you very much, Miriam. This covers the comments and the questions that were in the chat box for now. Ash, yes, and you can move back to the presentation.
Okay.
Oh,
so
sorry.
Ida, so you raise your hand.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I did not see your hand raised. Please go ahead. Go ahead, Ida. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
You
So
saw it, Hisham. Don't say you didn't.
He just wanted me to contribute.
He just didn't want to.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just thinking for my case, like I've seen some of the I've noted that some of the challenges come when due to volatile or unstable economic environment, political environment, such that even if at times there's well coordinated or policies to govern labor migration. For instance, we can have bilateral agreements that we are there's a particular skill set that's being sent to another country for this period, but when it comes to sort of returning the migrants under a hard economic environment, you always see that at the end of the day, it always feeds into irregular migration, like those say expatriates, or like those that would have gone, say, under construction or seasonal agriculture, when their permits expires, they're not renewed and they don't want to come back home, such that they're just left vulnerable, and there's just this increase of exploitation and abuse. So that's just some of the challenge of managing labor migration, or even if it's properly planned or coordinated under challenging social, economic, and political environment. Thank you.
Ida, let me just want to make sure that I understood clearly. What you're saying is that potentially in existing bilateral agreements at the end of that are very much on circular migration, at the end, I would say, of the contract, the person remain, right, and in the country of destination, and therefore is exploited. Am I right? This is what
yes, thank you. Yes.
Okay. So just to give you, I think here it's an example of. So for me, there is two examples here. Here is potentially looking at the bilateral agreement, but that's another course. But looking at the specific agreement, to what extent the agreement as well is very much as well including the reintegration process. And by reintegration, I not mean the proper return. I mean what is in the agreement to facilitate and foster the reintegration, the economic and social integration of the returnees. So an agreement shouldn't necessarily only looking at, I need these numbers of workers and they will stay for a couple of months, in particularly in sectors such as agriculture, tourism, for instance, constructions, and then once this is over, they return. And I just want to make sure that they leave my country. What in the agreement, and this is where we see the coherence and the collaboration between country of origin and destination, what is done to facilitate their reintegration? How as well, once you ensure the return, because that's basically the end of the contract, but then you're making sure that there is a plan once they are back. Okay, so that's one aspect. The second aspect for me is that, well, maybe, the agreement is looking from a kind of a short-term or a short-term migration duration and a temporary migration, while potentially the needs are permanent. So why should it be a temporary migration programs? Why couldn't be just long-term programs? Because it seems that if the people are overstaying, is that they might continue to work in the same sectors, but with less advantage and potentially more risk of exploitation and vulnerability. So here as well how the programs, the BLA in that specific case, is actually in line with the labor market needs. BLA don't necessarily has to be temporary. So I see here two aspects. One is the collaboration and ensuring a shared responsibility towards the cycle, including the reintegration. And the second is to what extent the agreement has been developed, and then this, again, the questions of coherence with the actual labor market needs. So that's what I'm seeing as 2 points, and illustrating with your example, the sometimes incoherence between migration programs and the actual labor market needs. So you think you have an agreement, you had an agreement, and that's for you a frame that is obviously willing to address irregular migration and ensuring that you have proper and orderly corridors for migration, which is good, but then it shouldn't be the only objective of your agreement. It should ensure that there is proper condition of work abroad, and then it's entering to your labor market needs. So that's the consideration for the country of destination. But it should also integrate the reintegration that very often is leave apart, except to the effective return. So, but this is not reintegration. Effective return is not reintegration. Reintegration would also include programs for the returnees to have access to training, potentially. There is a lot of idea of potentially set up their own potentially business, but here again, let's be frank as well on the limitation of these kind of programs. But this is also aspect that reintegration, and in the agreement you should integrate.
Thank you. Happy for us to move on.
Shall I go, Isham?
Yes, please go, because we're almost about to run out of time, Miriam.
Okay. With regard of the different of certain of the principles you need to integrate in the policy design, I think that's potentially has been seen with Vincent at the beginning of the course, because you had covered the questions related to policy design. Am I right? Okay, let me switch that. And then just to give you some example for promoting policy coherence. So what should be, for instance, developed is some coordination mechanism that established interministerial committee for labor, education, and migration. So here is the collaboration among the different ministries. Here you can clearly, for instance, integrate as well other ministries such as health. If you have a high level of migration in the health sectors, you need to align labor market needs with training, and that is indeed what I explained before. So, and that need to be done at the sectoral level. So you need to conduct sectoral skills forecasting to anticipate your need, but also to potentially update your curricula to better also respond to needs abroad. So you can, in a way, attract with your training programs, first offer from coming from abroad, from the perspective of country of origin, but also you can attract potentially as well potential workers that might seen as an opportunities migration, and might be therefore be more attracted to join certain training programs. Promoting fair recruitment practices, that is very key as well, and it need to be enforced with fair recruitment standard and international agreements. Fostering international cooperation, I already mentioned that. Strengthening bilateral agreement between country of origin and destination, or mutual skills development to ensure avoid brain waste and facilitate skills recognition. And that is what I just mentioned, reintegrate, return, and recircular migration within potentially existing programs, or developing specific reintegration programs for return migrants. These are some examples of coherence between labor migration and skills policy. So you have the Global Skills Partnership that at the interregional level aim to facilitate the skills portability between country of origin and destination. You have a specific example of a mobility partnership between EU and Tunisia to align the vocational training in Tunisia with European labor market needs. And that's, for instance, Tunisia that has an interministerial task force that make sure that the labor migration policy is in line with so they were very much focusing on the EU market, the EU job demands, and improving the skills portability and recognition. Right now, they are working on as well putting in line their vocational training with the European Skills Competent Occupation, meaning that your diploma or your training in Tunisia would actually be directly in line with the frame, the European frame for the same kind of occupation. So the impact foreseen, and it's obviously still in process, but is to enhance employment opportunities not only for employment abroad, but also within Tunisia, because you at the same moment enhance your own vocational training, but it's also therefore a way to reduce irregular migration, because it would lead with more regular path for migration from Tunisia to EU. Maybe I will stop with this specific slide. Ishama, there are still some other slides, but I'm conscious about the time. But they will be available, and then they are all connected to specific publication that I will make sure you have access to, and that very easy to read, and that would give you clearer guidance on how, for instance, to assess. So let's assume that your country faces significant skills shortage in key industries such as healthcare and construction, while at the same time experiencing high youth unemployment. Several government policies aim to address this issue, but they are not coordinated at all, and they are working in silo. So what should be prioritized to improve policy coherence? A, creating a national skills forecast aligned with labor market needs. B, establishing a dedicated migration and skills coordination body. Or C, strengthening collaboration between education, employment, and migration sectors. So A, B, or C, what do you think in that specific case should be done to prioritize or to improve policy coherence? So, Julia, you mentioned C. So obviously, it's not about giving me just a letter. It's about explaining why you gave me that that option.
I thought it was a vote. No, again, I guess also it depends on your national context, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, I feel like finally Germany has recognized that we have indeed a problem and that it's urgent and we need to do something about it. But I still feel like what you mentioned just now, operating in silos, there are some collaborations, there are roundtables where people talk, but when it comes to what is actually being done, I feel like and I know this is being recorded, please don't quote me. I can see my name here, but I feel like it's not all the heads are being put together to find the best solution. It's known now what the solution would be, and that would require for everyone to really closely collaborate. All because when we also look at labor migration and some of the bottlenecks that we are facing, the mandates for solving these issues, they lie across different ministries. So if you would really want to find a comprehensive answer, you would have to bring all of these closer together because we have visa issues, we have housing issues, we have recognition of qualifications, and all of these lie across different ministries. So if it were to really find a comprehensive answer, I think it would require for these entities to work closer together.
Thank you very much, Julia. I don't know if someone else want to contribute, or maybe seeing more A or B as an option.
So Ida's saying, I'm not seeing the rest of the answers. My machine may be playing tricks on me. So we'll go ahead. Option A is creating a national skills forecast aligned with labor market needs. Option B is establishing a dedicated migration and skills coordination body. And option C is strengthening collaboration between education, employment, and migration sectors. I'm going to also write them in the chat box.
So we have Kalima mentioning C. I don't know, Kalima, if you can take the floor. If not, if you can just write it down in one or two sentences why you think C.
Sorry, I'm not able to raise my hand, but maybe just to call
Jacqueline, yeah, please.
different. Maybe there could also be a value to A as to give also a basis for discussion and collaboration between the legislator. I don't know.
I see that Isham is typing the three options, and then so we have Jacqueline saying that A could also be an option. We had twice C as strengthening the collaboration, and then I just maybe I down B enhancing social. So either you creating option a second option, a fourth option, option D, that would be enhanced social dialogue and coordination on policy coherence. Well, why not?
I'm not seeing the option D. Oh no.
No, there is no option D, but I can add it, for maybe my next presentation. So, so I think at the end of the day, there is, and you mentioned that it's a mix of the three options. It's very much depending the specific context. It's very much depending, again, there is no one fits all solution. It's a little bit maybe of the three of them. It's maybe at a certain moment more A, and then you move to C. So there is no right and wrong answer here. It's looking at the context, the specificity governance structure of the country, the moment, because for instance, to potentially address as Jacqueline mentioned, that can be very important at a specific moment when you have, particularly from the perspective for both protective country of origin and destination, at the sectoral level, you see that there is a specific need, and you need to anticipate, you need to understand what is my future needs, and therefore I need potentially to adjust my education policy for ensuring that I respond to the labor market needs. Maybe I can answer it just with national workforce. Maybe I would have to go abroad. From the perspective of country of origin, you might receive a lot of requests, but you have no idea actually to how much you can, if I can put it that way, provide, to answer to labor market needs abroad. But you also have to think again about your own needs. So you need to have this forecast. C, it's potentially more in the kind of continuation, because as you rightly mentioned, Julia, it's the questions of responsibility of many different governing bodies. So it can be education, it can be health, in the specific case of health sector that we know today is at the center of most of the needs of a country of destination, but at the same time also very much needed for the development of the country of origin. You have a specific Ministry of Education, Employment. So you need to strengthening this collaboration and set up a governing body facilitating regular consultation among the different institutional authorities. Sometimes you might have specific ministries that are not necessarily willing to open discussion with non-state actors. But Home Affairs might not be keen to see at the table workers and employers organization, because that are more the kind of natural partners of Ministry of Labor. It's okay, but then it's to the Ministry of Labor to potentially have specific ad hoc session with the social partners to ensure that, it's bring the voice as well of the private sector to potential interministerial discussion. So again, there is no right and wrong answer. It's a mix of them. It's a moment where A might be more a priority than B. So, but to consider as being necessary in any case for your policy coherence. Isham, I think I will stop here because I have no clue what time it is. I have no access, sorry, to my clock. So, but I think we have passed the time.
No, but the time is perfect. We can, if there are any more questions, we have time to field them. But again, I would like to thank you, Miriam, for a great presentation. And the proof is that we were not able to go through all
as usual.
As usual,
I'm talk active,
But I would like to think that this is has been one of the most interactive sessions we've had. And you see, Julia is also clapping there. Thank you, Julia, for the vote of confidence here. But again, the rest of the presentation, or indeed the whole presentation, is going to be on the eCampus. And if there are any more questions, I'll let you digest them a bit here. But there were two questions and comments from in the chat box previously. Ida was actually asking if there lost here. Yes, if we could share some material on African countries with sound reintegration programs for the vulnerable returning migrants for more knowledge on best practices, enhancement of policy coherence, and labor market empowerment. So let you address that, but I'm sure we can share some of those in the on our eCampus. I would like to thank Julia and Jacqueline, who already provided some examples in the chat box. Thank you, Julia and Jacqueline, for providing some of that to Ida as well, and indeed to the benefit of the rest of the participants. I'm looking. I see there's a comment potentially. Sebastian will give you the floor to say about the group work at the end. There's one more question, which is not related to this session, but was provided by Julia, I believe. It was on more in relation to the TAM project. So asking if you could elaborate on a bit on ILO's role in the EU talent partnerships, and specifically within the TAM project. I know the GIZ side to TAM a bit, but I'm still developing a better understanding about all actors involved and how they interact and the program works in practice.
Okay. Yeah, I can. Funny enough, I don't have my I could have a presentation on the time objectives if you want. TAM Plus, because now we are the second phase of TAM, is a project looking into supporting or legal migration between North African countries, namely Tunisia, Morocco, and Egypt, towards Europe. And it's happening in a very specific framework, which is the talent partnership. So EU has adopted what they have called the talent partnership to enhance skills mobility between certain European countries, member of the talent partnership, and North African, at least not only North African country, but certain North African countries, Tunisia, Egypt, and Morocco. There are different agencies involved. So ILO is one of them. There is indeed, Julia, as you know, GIZ, IOM, ICE, so the Italian cooperation. Basically, while GIZ is looking to the specific corridors of North African country towards Germany, you have IOM looking at corridors between Morocco, Tunisia, Italy. ICE in Egypt looking at corridors between Egypt and Italy. We, as ILO, we are not looking specifically to our corridors. We are not involved in a specific mobility scheme, but we are more looking into the governance aspect. So our role in the TAM Plus project is very much to accompanying the different countries more at the governance level, ensuring indeed this coherence between labor migration programs and policy and their employment and skills policy. So we are more there to work on the governance of labor migration in general as a kind of cross-cutting component, and looking as well to the specificity to facilitate the dialogue again between EU countries and North African country. And we just, for instance, together with ITC ILO, finished to implement one of the key strategic activities for the ILO within the TAM Plus project, which is the forum happening, the National Technical Forum happening at the national level, looking at specific sectors or occupation and putting together actors from EU and actors from, in that case, it was Morocco, mainly from the private sectors, but also, so this was actually a example of coherence or testing coherence. So having participative approach to develop a plan of action to facilitate the migration of heavy vehicle drivers, and therefore putting together representative of employers federation from EU, Morocco, TVET centers, ministries as well, and trying to see how making it feasible and looking what are some of the bottlenecks that making it complicate. So looking at the role that each of us has to play. So that is also kind of the role of the ILO is facilitating the discussion among EU member states and North African countries, in line with the talent partnership priorities and in line with the discussion on nourishing the discussion of the talent partnership roundtable, which is happening more at the kind of political level between EU member states and North African countries. If you want more information, Julia, I will be happy to share with you. And by the way, I have a meeting with the regional project manager of GIZ in 30 minutes. So we see also how to coordinate because coordination and coherence is also happening among the different agencies and making sure that we're working properly together.
Well, thank you, Julia, for your question, and thank you again, Miriam, for a great session. Before we close, I'd like to give the floor to Sebastian, who's going to talk to us about the group work, which you all may know, or already know, we should know, that the presentation will be next week. But Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ish. Yes, I just wanted to take 30 seconds because we're already late to say that please remember that you can upload your presentations on the eCampus. Last week we sent you the links where you can access and upload these presentations. Those will be on the 27th. And yes, please, if you have any issues on the presentation or with the group work, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, have a good rest of the day, or have good evening or good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Just wanted to clarify one last thing. We know you have been making a lot of effort to ensure that all the group members are participating in the group work. But if you're not able to, it may happen. It's okay. You can move ahead with the group work. Please just make sure to include the names of the people who actively participated in your presentation and in your work, so that we know who participated in the group. So please you don't have to get 100% engagement. It would be ideal if you could get 100% engagement from your group members, but if you're not able to, please proceed without them. Having said that, thank you again, Miriam. Saying thank you to all of you. Thank you for your participation, for your attention, and we will see you next Tuesday. So have a great weekend or a great continuation to your day. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.